Welcome everyone to another Bloom webinar. We've got a very interesting topic today that we will be talking about. It's basically supporting digital strategies, advertising strategies, communication, overall advertisings with data and insights, and why is it so crucial? The reason why basically is that we know today that consumers' touch points are multiplying constantly. Content channels are multiplying, and we're basically living in an omni-media world. So ultimately it could be quite challenging to identify the right channels, the right audience, and targeting them with the right creative. We also know that consumers' expectations are higher than ever. They're more solicited than ever. And let's not forget iOS 14.5. So ultimately, brands need to get it right the first time. We don't want to miss the mark, and we want to make sure that we will put the money on the right audiences and on the right channels. However, we do have access to tons of data and insights to help us make plans that are more efficient. And that's what we will be talking about today. We're super lucky to have Sandra Abi-Rashed, which is partner at Happyfication, a data intelligence platform. And Sandra, can you share with us a bit more, what does Happyfication actually do?
Yes, absolutely. And thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here. Happyfication was founded 5-6 years ago to address two main challenges in the industry. And there are two challenges that you all know, being in the space for so long. The first one is a lack of transparency in the media buying. And the second are, and you mentioned it, the silos and the fragmented reality that we have in media. So the silos on the brand side, but also the silos that exist within the media chain itself. So Happyfication is a technology, it's a methodology, and it's a team of strategists and experts that think, that plan, that execute, trade, and report on an omni-media level.
Great. Thank you so much, Sandra. We're really happy to have you today. We also have Jeff. Jeff is our media director at Bloom. Jeff has been with Bloom for over 10 years now. Can you tell us a bit more, Jeff, of your role at Bloom?
Absolutely. So, Sandra, thanks for coming again. Jeff, director of paid media, like you said. What I do on a daily basis is I'm working with a 20-man team, building, researching, optimizing, strategizing, reporting on, and A/B testing continually, anything advertising. So we'll take the kinds of data that we're going to talk about from Sandra's side, activate on that, and continually iterate and optimize it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jeff. And myself, I'm VP Strategy at Bloom. So moving along, basically, we've all seen this. Everyone that works in marketing and digital has seen a conversion funnel, or sometimes we could call it a customer journey. There's 3 essential steps: awareness, consideration, conversion. The goal is to get that user all the way down to the conversion and decision. Jeff, you work with this process pretty much every day, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this funnel, obviously, basic marketing thought process you'll learn in school. We do talk about it on a daily basis. It is a great way for us to make sure that we're valuing each part of these steps. You need to take certain actions as a business during the awareness step, during the activation and the conversion step, and make sure that you're addressing our end users or consumers in a certain way. The reason why I think this is kind of, let's say, continued as a useful tool for us is that I think it helps us marketers as humans properly control and understand what we can do logically in each one of these steps. Obviously, this is not exactly how a user will convert, but it's a great way for marketers to understand what needs to happen throughout that funnel step.
And that's a great segue, Jeff. Thank you so much. Sandra, what's your take on the classical conversion funnel? Is it the most efficient way to visualize the consumer's buying process?
Well, I love that Jeff said, two things. I love that you mentioned, we've learned this in school, and then there's a notion of control. So, I think traditionally, and go back to the theory of school, and it's not wrong. On paper, it makes sense. There's awareness, there's a funnel. I think as marketers love to see this funnel because just visually, you look at your pool and you want to understand. And like you said, Jeff, it's a sense of control. Like, I want to know how many people are in my awareness funnel. What's my percentage? What's my conversion? How do I tweak that? So there's a notion of, mathematics and controlling what's happening in my funnel, what's going in my bottom funnel. But as you said, the reality is the way we think, the way we buy, our whole process and our journey and our customers' journey isn't linear. We go from the top of the funnel to the bottom of a funnel. We go across the funnel to different, as you said, France, in your intro, to different, channels and touch points. And, the reality is, today, if we're watching, choose a show, Schitt's Creek, we're not saying, oh, I'm watching it on my mobile today. Oh, hold on, right now I'm watching it on my iPad now. We're just watching, and we're going through. So the consumption journey for products and brands isn't linear, and the way we consume media isn't linear. So we need to stop thinking, our process, our decision process isn't in silos like that. So if our decision process isn't in silos, then, we shouldn't be as media strategists thinking in silos either.
And that's great, because like in an ideal world, creative is in sync with strategy, which is in sync with media planning, which is in sync with the client's brand team. But sadly, and more time than others, we continue working in silos because sometimes it could be cost prohibitive. Sometimes it's a culture thing. We've been working on breaking the silos at Bloom for a good while now. We're getting there. But I think one key thing, and just to get back to today's topic, is that we have data, and data becomes a premium asset, a premium resource that we're able to pass along every department, from creative to strategy to planning, to share with the client, and the client shares with us their data. So it becomes a cross-functional assets that helps us maybe not break the silos, but at least bridge them. And before we jump into data and insight, Sandra, I think it'd be great if you could actually talk to, and we've had this conversation in the past through collaboration, the whole notion of cognitive decision making.
Yeah, so I think, before we think about data, absolutely, we need to go back to how our brain functions. And, it seems basic to look at it that way, but it really has an impact on the journey and then how we use the data. So if we go back to the different parts of the brain, there are three parts. The first part is the reptilian brain. And that's probably the part that I would say is super important for us as humans, because it's what keeps us alive and breathing, and the balance, and anything that's, compulsive behavior though. So we need that part, but it's probably the least important part for marketers. The two parts that I think are absolutely necessary for us as marketers to understand how consumers think is the limbic, so the middle emotional brain, and then the neocortex, what we call the new rational brain. And the emotional side is actually represents 70 to 95% of our decision process. So it weighs a lot in how we connect with brands and how we value brands. So, that's huge, 70 to 90%. That's the emotional side. And then we have the rational side that looks at the fine print and looks like the details, and is it rational, and do I really need this product? Like when you're buying, an e-bike, we were chatting before the call, an electric bike. I need an electric bike because it's rational. It's going to get me from point A to point B. But I need an electric bike because it's a fashion statement, and I can see myself, around my neighborhood. There's an emotional side of having something that's eco-friendly and that's electric. So there's always those two parts of that brain that we need to consider in the decision process, and they work together. So the emotional triggers and the rational triggers.
And that's very, very interesting. And it brings us to and that's a great statement, Sandra.
We're not thinking machines that feel, but we're feeling machines that think. And that's super important. That's like the base of how we use insights to inform what we do after.
And it's very interesting because we go back to the whole notions of something that is very dear to me, which is a whole theories of brand positioning. Although it's not the topic today. When we're looking at brand positioning and branding, we're looking at brand values. You were referring to emotional and rational triggers. We bring that back to emotional benefits and rational benefits. And as we move closer, or we're able to reconcile that with the conversion funnel, we're able to align consumer values with brand values. And the closer we get to that, the closer we get to an emotional connection, and ultimately the closer we get to getting that consumer to take that action that we really want to take, that we really want them to take. So that's very...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sorry. And when we look at the brain, if we go back to the brain, because the emotional triggers represent, again, 70 to 95%, the more we can hone in on that part of the brain, then the better we can align the values of a brand to the values of a consumer, and then the faster we can go through the funnel.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of data today, is because we have access to these type of informations and insights. Jeff, can you share with us a bit of what kind of baseline data that brands today have access to from the get-go?
Absolutely. So that's a fair point from the get-go. We'll often onboard clients and talk about what kind of data do you have, what can we activate on. They'll assume they don't have anything if they've not run campaigns in the past. But every client or every company has rich data sets of their own. We'll call that first-party data. Could be your CRM list, could be most typically your web analytics, often Google Analytics, social information. If you've done surveys, customer feedback, all of that is your first-party data that you can take, you can activate, you can dissect, and you can use to take action on and activate your advertising campaigns. So that's one data set. That's what everyone has access to. Could be basic, could be extremely complex, but everyone has something. Other side, third-party data, think of that as anything you can gain access to that is not your company's data. So think of the Oracles, the Blue Kai, Facebook, Google, whatever. You can link into those other data sources that you do not personally own, but layer that on top of what you have learned on your first party. Activate, look for wider reach using that information, and activate ad campaigns and that type of thing.
Great, thank you so much, Jeff. And working with Bloom, working with Happyfication, Sandra, the Happyfication platform, uses first-party and third-party data, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So as Jeff mentioned, when we work with partners and brands, we'll first look at, what does the brand have access to in terms of first-party data, and then our platform and technology is bound to different third-party sources. I think the one source that we wanted to focus on today was a declarative custom panel source. So I think we're talking about, in our methodology, we talk about inversing the model. So looking at it, and we all know, the traditional way is we would often start with creative. We've been in that room where you're showing the TV spot and we're looking at creatives and what are we doing, and then the big wow. And what, our methodology is, shifting it around and saying, before we even look at creative, because we want to look at the emotional and rational triggers that can have an impact on the consumer decision journey, why don't we look at the data first and understand that cognitive process, and then use those insights to inform creative and media planning and audiences.
Absolutely, great. And that's very true. I mean, it's starting with data to get the insight to inform creative, audiences, planning who we are targeting is probably the most efficient way of going through this.
Yeah. So if we start with, as I mentioned, we work with a number of third-party sources, but today we'll talk about the declarative custom panel. So what we do in that first, so when we inverse that process, when we're looking at the data, is we'll start by building what we call an audience model. And when we build an audience model, we're using a declarative panel that has a presence in 44 different countries with 35,000 different data points. And a data point is a socio-demo, age, location, attitudes, perceptions, values, etc., transactional information. Any data point that could give us more insights on a consumer or a profile. So in this example, we've built two audience models. An audience model definition is basically a Boolean definition. So Boolean is the and or definition. In this example, we have an example of a brand, a North Face of the world type brand, Smart World North Face. So in the broad definition, we're looking at you live in the US, you have a certain income, you're interested in adventure sports and outdoor activities and camping, etc., and or winter sports, so skiing. So that's a broad definition. But if we really want to understand and go back to what triggers the target market from an emotional and rational perspective, then we build a narrow audience, which in addition to what we have in the red, the broad audience, we also have knowing, I'm adventurous, and knowing, go back to my electric bike example, there's a reason why we want to buy this brand. I'm adventurous, I feel adventurous. I know that this brand is environmentally friendly. I know that they're helping the environment. That's important to me. I purchase online, like all of those things. So when we build these models, what we're trying to identify again are the triggers, and then the profiles connected to all of those 35,000 data points, so that we can build a smarter creative, better audiences, and a better media plan.
And that's great. And right here, we're already starting to touch on insights about a value. But let's just take a step back in terms of knowing who our audiences are, basically. Getting back to the notion of baseline data, so we can inform that all brands have access to some kind of baseline data to inform them inform the brands on who their audience are. What kind of data do we have available, Jeff, in the short run, in the short term?
We went pretty far on the previous slide, talked about some really interesting deep data. If we're going to take a step back and talk about, I've just activated or opened up my business, we have very minimal data. The types of things you might want to look at to start to glean insights and understand who your customers are and what they're doing. Jump into GA. Obviously, we could talk about GA4. That's pretty critical to activate and get deeper data, access to more interesting insights. But even the basic GA, which is what we've got on screen right now, we can take a look at socio-demographic data. So are they in one specific country, one specific region, city, what have you? Are they a specific age group? And what do those things tell us about our targets? We can get into a lot of very different things, but at its really most basic level, you've got that data in your analytics profile. Go take a look and see who you need to target.
That's great, Jeff. Thank you. And I remember, Sandra, when we started talking, before we started collaborating, the Happyfication pitch was basically enriching data enrichment, and I've seen with my own eyes what is data enrichment. So how does a tool like Happyfication enrich data, basically, if you could share that?
Yeah, so I really love that we're looking at first party data and then what we can do with enriched data, because it's absolutely necessary to look at what we have. So as Jeff pointed out, what do we have in GA? What is GA telling us? What story do we have? And then we look at, and we'll go through this, like declarative data and custom data and information. I think what's most important is that we need to consider everything. So we need to consider what's GA telling us, what are some segments and interests that we see there, socio-demographics, what is this data telling us? So, and then kind of interpret it the right way. So if we're looking at, if we go back to the audience models that we built in our example, what we're looking at here are, okay, so if we had a limited budget and for this brand and we wanted to launch a media campaign, where should we focus? Could we focus everywhere? You know, is 100,000 enough for the US, all the states? And our answer would be no, but we'll say, let's look at the data and look at where do we have the best reach? Where do we have the highest affinity or index? So right now we know that California and New York always have high volume, but in the data, we also see that there's a high index. So that's great. But we also see that Georgia and Virginia could be good test markets. So, you know, this is when we can identify opportunities to test, to A/B test. We'll look at urban context. Are we focusing more urban? Are we focusing more rural? Where's our target market today? So how many are there? Where are they? How old are they? Do they skew younger? So this is when we see, you know, either a comparable with GA or some new information. In this particular case, we're skewing younger. We're seeing that women are overrepresented and they're over-indexing. We can look at employment status and a number of other socio-demo factors to get a better understanding of the profile.
That's very, very good. And to your point, now we're starting to build some sort of general portrait général, pardon my French, of our audiences, younger, to your example, Sandra, younger female living in urban areas in the US. Jeff, what else can we look into?
Yeah, so going back to the GA reference point, obviously the deeper you dig, the more information you can get. You know, I called out socioeconomic or socio-demographic before, but you can look in deeper. Thankfully, Google has some pretty rich data sets. We can look into things like affinity categories. So like Sandra has said, are you over-indexing on an interest for something? So can we over-index on an e-bike interest, that kind of thing? Are we seeing a lot of people who really like sports or really like extreme hiking? I don't know, whatever. So there's affinity stuff. There's also really critically in-market segments. Really interesting things in there. So in this case, Sandra may have been in market for an e-bike. If that was a category we could have gone after. But these are the types of things that will show real intent to purchase. So Google's collecting all this data on a regular basis, and they can see when someone is ready to make that purchase, make that buy, and they've put them in that specific bucket. So these are just a couple, but obviously we can get into things like which kind of data sources are referring to your site if you have referrals. What are some other potential topics you could get into? As long as you're slicing and dicing the data that you have in GA, there's a lot of really interesting insights you can glean and take action on.
And yes, that's great. And working with GA and Happyfication, there's additional information that we could get through the Happyfication platform about interest, which I find very interesting, no pun intended. Sandra, can you share with us these additional interests that we could have access to?
One of the that we have in the audience analysis is the interest. So, you know, in addition to what Jeff mentioned, using that to really hone in on, you know, how we can use that as actionable segments. Again, when we look at these audience models and the analysis, we like to look at scale and target. So we like to look at where we're driving reach. So for example, in this case, we know that a large percentage of this audience that we've identified is interested in music and eating out and cooking and beauty and cosmetics and personal healthcare. That's reach. But if we only focus on reach, then we're not targeted enough. And if we only focus on index, then we're too targeted and there's wastage, right? So we're too targeted and we're missing opportunities. So we'll really look at the two things. And what's interesting is where we're over-indexing too. So playing sports, we're over-indexing in vegan, we're over-indexing in entrepreneurs and business and fashion. So again, yes, it can help us with media, actionable segments and A/B testing, but it can also, you know, if we put our general marketing hat on, it can help us identify opportunities for partnerships or influencers. You know, it's you know, let's go back to the outdoor brands. You know, it's probably an obvious choice to, well, we'll choose an influencer that has, you know, that's an outdoorsy profile. But, you know, what we're seeing here is, okay, look, there's a high affinity with fashion and a high affinity with vegan for some reason. Yeah. So, you know, it brings us into the reason why we do these models, it can confirm assumptions, it can identify blind spots, it can identify A/B testing and interests that we could use, across the board in other areas of a marketing strategy, a brand strategy,
including informing la stratégie de création. Pardon my French. And
and music is another example where if we look at oftentimes the choice for music in a video, as an example, the background is a personal choice. So it's the art director or the marketing head. But if we look at, I love jazz, so let's use jazz. Everybody loves jazz. Yeah. But if we start to look at the data and look at, okay, where are we over indexing? And if we're targeting this market, 25 to 35-year-olds interested in outdoors and they're adventurous and they love sustainable products and environment, what do they like? So, and this, this can also help us with, placement, contextual targeting. So it really is trying to tell a story from the data and bring the data to life in a plan, in our media plans.
Totally makes sense. And it's the way to go. Jeff, I presume that these insights would be reflected in the audiences that you would choose to target.
Absolutely. So the information that's fed from that data source that Sandra's referring to, all of these the rich data that we can gain access to, it will definitely inform the audiences. It'll inform which platforms we'll go to based on the audience. It'll inform which type of creative we'll want to use, like she said before as well. Is there specific audio that we should be using? Should we be using jazz or not jazz, hip hop, EDM, whatever? Can we be putting some of these things in to really emotionally engage with our target? Is there something that should be in that video visually or in the static ad visually to really trigger our audience to make sure that we have that target bucket down? Are we putting together the right creative as well to speak to that target bucket? So yeah, absolutely. Informing data or taking data to inform our decisions is absolutely critical.
And that's really interesting, Jeff, because you're basically leading the strategy and the media bloom. Now you're talking creative. So absolutely. Case in point,
it's just as critical.
Exactly. Basically, I would like to get to this slide in terms of perception, values, and attitude, Sandra. If you could talk to this to inform even more what how data enrichment could help us be more efficient.
Yeah, and listen, I think any data points or any insight that we have on a target or an audience can help us plan better. I think that's really the takeaway here. So in addition to the socio demo that we have and the location and the interests, we can look at perceptions and values and attitudes. This can help us, in this case, the audience, again, same audience model, they like to explore the world, they're interested in other cultures, they like to take risks, they like to stand out in a crowd and challenge themselves. So this can help us with messaging, it can help us with creative, it can help us with content strategy. And this ties well into a question that's actually in the chat. How can the emotional benefit be leveraged in audience targeting? So, we can, the idea is to use the emotional benefit and insert it into the model so that we can then look at all the insights and all of the data points, such as perception and values and attitudes, because what we're trying to do, again, is get into the brain of the consumer that has an emotional and rational trigger. So we're using the emotional benefits, such as adventurous, and I care about the environment, and I'm buying this product, this brand for a reason. And then when we look at perceptions and values and attitudes and interests, that's how it informs the rest. So if you do it, we can answer that. We can go deeper into the question after in the Q&A, but that kind of ties it all together, right?
It's really interesting because it becomes, that's when we make a decision of, does this the spirit adventure becomes the overarching strategy and creative platform and so forth to get to your point.
And again, even this perceptions, values, and attitudes, I mean, it's not only for the messaging. If we think about, okay, look, they like to explore the world and they're interested in other cultures, and that wasn't in the model. So what does that tell us about the way people think? So, travel didn't necessarily come up in the interest, But if we know that this is how they think, then maybe there's travel needs to play a part in our media plan. We really need to look at it holistically.
Absolutely.
To see how it all fits together.
Absolutely. And it's very interesting because we're getting a very good idea. Social, demo, psychographics, values, and interests. So tying this together, now we get to a point that we need to engage these users on different platforms. And that's becoming a challenge, Jeff, if I'm not mistaken, engaging users and choosing the right platforms, basically.
Talking data right now. Let's take a step back and say what has been happening over, let's say, the last decade. I'll talk about when I started in the industry. At the time, I was doing search only, and that was a good enough channel for the majority of our clients and the majority of businesses in digital at the time. Obviously, that has changed from 10 years ago, let's say, to now. There's been a multiplication of channels, a lot more devices that we need to worry about, a lot more environments, different media consumption habits, all of these things. Think search only versus now we need to think search, display, video, YouTube, TikTok, TV, Spotify, podcasts. What is this multiplication of channels we're getting into, and how do we cut through the noise? How do we choose the effective channel, and how do we leverage that channel effectively? And that's really why we now need far more data right now than we ever have needed before.
For sure. And I know there's a media consumption module on Happyfication, Sandra, that I've worked with. Actually, can you run through this with us? Sorry.
Yes. So there are a number of modules that are related to media. So we talked about a custom declarative panel. So if you know the market space in terms of panels, there's raw data that we get from a panel. How much time do you spend on your mobile? Where do you live? And what are your interests? So that's the raw data. And then what we do in addition to that is we layer on our algorithms to extract data points that could help us inform media consumption and media behavior that go over and above the raw data. So on the left here, we see time spent. So time spent's important. We need to look at where is our target, again, the model that we built that's based on emotional and rational triggers. Where are they spending the most time? So in this case, they're spending the most time on laptop and mobile. But again, where are they over-indexing versus the general population? Mobile, music, video streaming, social media, check. So we get that. And then we move on to the right where we're looking at what we call affinities. So where do we think based on, do they live in an urban center? Do they drive to work every day? Would they have more affinities with out of home or not? How much content do they download on mobile? Yes or no? How much time and have they bought any mobile content? So that could help us indicate, is there an affinity with mobile? So in this case, we look at affinity, display, video, in-stream search as an example, and affinity delta, which is always the difference versus the general population. So, display, social, and search. In addition to that, we'll look at other modules such as digital usage, social network usage, content affinity. So, and these are examples among a few of them. Where is this audience that we've defined spending their time in terms of digital? Why do they use digital? They search for information, they keep in touch with friends. Some of it is obvious, but then when we see that the top ones in terms of reach are watching videos and listening to music, that helps us connect with the other modules that we see when we're like, okay, music was music was an interest, there's something there. Social network usage, what platforms are they using? What type of content do they have the most affinity with? We have an opportunity module where we look at the highest opportunity in a 1 week's flight based on the data that we have. And we also have an overlap module where we look at media consumption and how the media consumption can overlap with each other. I think that's the next slide.
That's the next slide, eh? If you could go to the next slide. Yes.
Yeah, perfect. So touch point overlap. Touchpoint overlap will tell us, for example, based on the data that we have and the algorithms that we have, a model X consumes or has affinities with all of these different touch points. We want to understand where the overlaps are so that we can build that into the plan. So a case in point is if we see that TV has a very high overlap with retail and out of home and video in stream, and we're looking for higher frequency, that may be the case in the plan. We're looking for high frequency. We may decide to choose touch points that overlap with each other. If we're looking for reach and lower frequency, we may choose touch points that have less of an overlap. So these are examples of modules that we use to inform media plans, and you know that we've used them together to when we've worked on various projects. Jeff, France.
Thank you so much, Sandra. That's great. Jeff, to close this off.
Yeah, absolutely. So we touched on really basic data sets in GA and other first-party data. We touched on really complex studies and other enriched data coming from Sandra. The idea with the partnership we have between Happyfication and Bloom is to better inform our actions before we take any action. So we take that data set, we enrich it, we understand it, we theorize what would be the best action. We take that and we apply it to a media plan. We do it effectively, and we try to say, instead of making assumptions and making guesses through some of your first-party data, we're making more informed, confirmed decisions based on the enriched data. So stronger media plan from the start, stronger and more effective creative because we have the data on the social emotional triggers for the creatives, build out that campaign properly, and then finally measure and optimize and confirm or deny whether or not that theory we had was correct and continue to iterate on that. That's really the idea with this partnership.
That's great. That's great. Thank you very much to both of you. Just a quick recap and key takeaways. Number one, what we know. Audience consumers are more solicited than ever. We're in a new paradigm, the privacy first paradigm. So the idea of getting it right the first time is key. And that's when data comes into play. Data will help us get it right the first time. And ultimately, by integrating data intelligence within our overall strategic planning and leveraging our partnership with Happyfication, we get to understand more the customer journey. And ultimately, and that's a key thing to Sandra's first point, understand, accept, and work with the fact that the conversion funnel is no longer linear. So that's pretty much it. I wanted to thank both of you and thank our audiences to attend this Bloom Happyfication webinar. And we could go into questions, basically, if there is questions.
Question there about frequency.
Yeah, from Nancy, you mentioned different frequency approaches. What are the factors that help to determine optimal frequency? It's a nice one.
Yeah, definitely a great question. Yeah, I think we could probably both layer on top some ideas here. I'll start. Depending on the goal of your account and the goal of your business, that frequency approach will definitely change. There's tons of studies out there to kind of show you what is the optimal frequency for brand lift, or what is the optimal frequency for performance or e-com or lead gen or whatever that is. So determining that it will be very personal for the business, unfortunately, so I can't give you a blanket answer. But looking at some of those studies, Google and Facebook will publish a lot of these types of things, so that'll give you an indication. And beyond that, if you have any of your own first-party data to see, have you run with a frequency cap of 3 and a frequency cap of 15? And what is the difference in engagement and performance based on that? So I'd say look at your studies, talk to your agency. Your agency should have some ideas on the average frequencies you'd want to aim for. And third, if you have your own test data, go through that and see what you got. Sandra, is there anything you?
You want to
You
add?
add to that?
Yeah, I just want to make sure my mic was on. Yeah, absolutely. So agree with everything that Jeff mentioned. Absolutely, it depends on the campaign, the objectives of the campaign, and I'll layer on an Omni-Media perspective. We need to remember that the optimal frequency of a campaign is across all touch points, but the optimal frequency per touch point could be different. And I'll just give an example, like our optimal frequency and a max frequency before we hit that burnout for an out-of-home billboard is probably like 20. It's over 20 because we pass it every day. And it actually brings us a sense of repetition and comfort because we know, now I'm going to pass that. It means I'm going to exit soon. Versus mobile, and when we're doing, video stream or, something a little bit more intrusive, that optimal frequency could be 3. So when we're planning from an Omni-Media perspective, we need to take into account the cost per cost per thousand exposed with optimal frequency, which could be different per touch point.
Okay.
So that's just another
way to look at it.
Another way to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question from Spencer on data collection. How do you collect data about what channels you target market are active on, what they over-index on, etc.? I don't know if you see the question from.
How do you collect data about the channels your target market are active on? So in the custom declarative panel, again, part of the data is raw. So part of the data is what consumers are actually responding, and it's based on a consolidation of different sources like CIA Factbook and Lightspeed and Toluna and so there's data that we know because that's what they tell us. It's declared. And then when we layer on our algorithms to pull out data that's based on consumption habits, it's based on a number of different raw data points that we combine. So I don't know if that answers the question, but we're using, what do they use? What time? How much time are they spending? What are their affinities? How do you discover brands? What can convince you to buy a product? Is it you discovered them? Is it a referral? Is it social media? So it's all of those questions that will help us inform the channels where we have the best affinities. I hope that answers the question, and where they over-index.
Okay, thank you so much, Sandra. Another question from Nancy, actually. This one's interesting because how can the emotional benefit be leveraged in audience targeting other than creative? So we're not talking.
I think we answered that.
Yeah, we answered that before.
Session.
It's when we're looking at environment and contextual and so on and so forth to align.
I think so. Yeah, unless Nancy still has a question, but she said, "Love it, thank you."
Okay, perfect.
There's another question in there though. Privacy being concerned. With privacy being a central concern, how can we be aligned with data collection and accurate understanding of our audience?
Oh, that's a nice one.
It's a really good one.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I would say, one, we're forced to comply, right? There's no two ways around it. So if you are complying, you are modifying your approach to it. So I'd say you're good to go. In terms of how you're being sensitive with it and things like that, that's a great question.
I think we need to loop back to our last webinar that we did with BLG in terms of third party versus first party, how first party data and enriching this first party data through CDPs working now with GA4 comes into play versus just collecting data ad hoc through third-party trackers, basically. So, and maybe Sandra, you have a point. I
have a couple things. I have a couple things to add, and it really just, we can do a whole other session just on this. But I think this is why So absolutely, for the first-party data, we need to comply. Check. Once we've complied, what else can we do to better understand our audience? And this is why. We look at, we talked about a declarative panel today. A declarative panel will give us probabilistic indices and suggestions and an approach. And we saw that all today. So this is actually a good example where we're not relying on device IDs or cookies or anything else. Yeah. We're actually we're taking the time to think about our target, the values, the benefits, the emotional, rational truth, everything that we talked about today, building a model and saying, hey, how can we use that to inform and then A/B test based on actionable segments or environments or everything that we saw. So that's one answer. And then I also think, we once we've checked off the box, I'm complying. That's great. There's also an opportunity to not look at, let's say, cookies and device IDs, because we want to move away from relying on that and looking at business data. So that's, it's a whole other conversation, but you can ingest your business data. So your sales, your retail sales, where you're selling across Canada, for example, and then look at your media performance and overlay that. And then you'd have more of an econometric model, which is based on correlations. Yeah. So you know that you've boosted your media in the rest of Canada, and then you see that the sales are lifting in a certain region. So it's a very different approach, but it's not deterministic based, it's not cookie based, it's not device based. It really is looking at your business data and then comparing that to media performance.
Yeah, and I think that's what I retain from what you're saying is declarative data, first party, and enrichment. And getting these algorithms that you guys have from a proprietary perspective, be able to come up with different models basically and inform.
Yeah, we need to be smarter with the models that we have, and we need to use, again, Jeff mentioned it. What do we have? We have a lot. And I think sometimes we forget that we have a lot. So, in addition to the GA, we have our business data, our sales.
Yeah.
That we can overlay, and we can use that as an indicator sometimes. So I think sometimes things go fast and we all move fast and quickly. When we stop and think about what we have access to, we actually have access to a lot.
That's great. That's great. Well, I think we've covered most of the questions. I wanted to thank everyone for attending. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Sandra, once again.
Thank you so much.
It's always great to collaborate with you guys. And we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.